Hello, everyone. This is Waldorf,
And this is Statler.
and today we're going to be looking at the ninth age rulebook beta 2.0 version. We're just going to go down the list of changes. I know we've gone through the rulebook before, but we're just going to hit the changes this time.
At least not all. Finished chewing on my Lebkuchen. We're not going to do all the changes. We kind of went through that one with rulebooks. Just ones that we think are important changes that people can miss.
You may or may not have missed. I mean, we're doing all the ones that, yeah. Anyway. All right. Does that make sense?
Doesn't matter. Our channel.
Good point. I agree.
Nothing else we make sense. Why should this?
All right. So let's start. First thing we have on our list is down here.
The new line formation, which replaces the old horde formation.
Correct. So now you have to be 8 instead of 10 wide. And if you're in this formation, you do not get rank bonus.
Right. You still get fight an extra rank as you did before, but no rank bonus.
The one thing I've seen that this comes up on is you want to be wide with shooting units, because a rule we'll talk about later is that the volley fire, you want to be wide, but you've got to be careful because now you have no ranks.
Yes.
You have no rank bonus. You do have ranks to be steadfast. You do not have rank bonus, and that's the big thing to remember on this one. You do keep your ranks in regards to being steadfast. You just are not
it's just
getting the result.
They don't help you win the combat.
Correct.
So it's moved from, at least from our opinion, to a formation that was focused more on horde types of armies,
Right.
but also benefited elite armies. Just they were just capped on how many guys they could have.
It was
so
hard for them to get
it was
more
hard
than
to
30 guys in a unit.
because they usually only had 30 anyway, so they didn't often get as much. But now, if you're in a frankly crappy guys, you're just kind of messing yourself up because the few extra attacks is not probably going to cause enough wounds to
Make up
even
for the
close
ranks.
to make up for the rank bonus. So
Correct. Whereas elites, being 24 guys in line formation, they all get to attack.
Right.
As opposed to 30 before.
And now if you buy the 30, you take some losses, you're still not losing combat power. So
But those extra attacks for the lower number of guys are going to make up for the
they tend to be
ranks
strength
that you
5.
give
They tend to be hitting on 3s,
Correct.
or better.
Or
so.
better.
Yeah.
So, but anyway,
So this is a big change that
to some armies. Yep.
for some armies that people who got used to. So you have to be a little careful if you are you're going wide with some of your big, bigger, cheaper units. All of a sudden, what do you mean I don't get a +3?
This I gotta say, this has me a little concerned with a lot of elite formations, especially like the. I mean, I haven't played a dwarf army yet in 2.0, and that kind of scares me. But anyway, moving on. What did we talk about? We go down
Line of sight.
We've got line of sight now. Line of sight now. The changes to line of sight as I pivot because I try to get my way down to it.
Yes.
The changes to line of sight are, of course, you can no longer. Well, anyway.
I think you went too far.
Probably went too far. Anyway, the change to line of sight now is you no longer see over models that are the same height as
Right.
you. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's a major change to the game.
Well, you can no longer see over models that are the same size.
Correct.
Skirmishers can no longer be used to block line of sight.
That is true now.
Yeah.
Skirmishers, I forgot about
I mean,
that.
they provide a concealment bonus, but you can see right through them.
Right.
And how the different sizes affect shooting. So you have to be larger to shoot or see or whatever. But if you are firing it, it's always going to be the concept of you having to be taller. And it gets kind of strange, which we'll see later as far as volley fire,
Right.
how you now you have to see who you're shooting at.
Correct.
So if everyone's the same size, you have to look through a gap or find something on the side.
See around the edge. Or
Right.
Another big change to this is, of course, what I've seen the big changes so far are war machines that are not larger than standard size.
Right.
And in mage bunkers, you got to be much more careful with your mage bunker because you've got to make sure to keep lines of sight open for it.
Right.
And the same thing with war machines. it's easy to screen a war machine.
It's much easier to screen a lot of war machines
Where it cannot shoot.
that don't have the tall ability. So yeah,
Correct.
definitely. And how you use light flyers is going to be a little different. You can't just hide them behind your lines and jump out whenever you want to charge.
Correct.
Yeah.
If they're the same height as
If
the
they're
guys.
the same height, so yeah.
Yep. But they can, on the other hand, the benefit to this is if you've got the little flyers that are the same height as infantry, they can hide right behind your line, be immune to being shot at from same height, from enemy troops and stuff until they need to hop over and become chaff.
Right. It also means you can screen your war machines for maybe that have shorter range, so you're not being taken out.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
It also means you can screen individual characters that are running around in your rear area before they were just begging for some rock lob or something to land on their head.
Worse than that, it was they're begging for a volley of 50 bow shots.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So you can hide your stuff. So it does tactically have it can potentially tactically have a big difference on the game.
Yeah.
A lot of armies won't affect too much because you don't have many guys, many units. But if you've got a lot of stuff out there,
Right.
you can really start getting in the way.
Yeah, I'm thinking Skaven and
Yeah.
goblin armies and that type of thing. Even undead armies, but
Anybody who wants to field lots of guys, so it's not usually the best strategy in this game as it's designed. But if you have those
lots of
types,
guys.
if you have those kind of armies, you have to be mindful.
All right, moving on. Next thing we have on our list was terrain.
Yes.
Specifically in terrain, the distribution of terrain.
Right.
And the way it's
And
selected.
how it's selected.
Now, again, you start with three things: a building or a cliff, a hill and a forest, and then randomizing terrain. You roll on this chart here. You've mentioned before you'd like to see more charts, whatever, but I don't like. Anyway, the way this chart is, they've added new terrain, the cliffs and the chasms,
Yes.
and they've reordered them.
Yes.
Forest is still the most common result if you're rolling up terrain, but the next ones are walls and ruins are the next most common
Yes.
results, where we're typically used to seeing like hills and fields in those positions. I mean, it's just kind of the way the distribution works. I'm not thrilled with it. I think the hills and the fields need to be more pushed into the common results.
Oh no, I agree. I mean, I have one is yes. I'd like to see the hills and the fields more in the common results, most definitely. I don't necessarily like, and we were chatting about this. They've introduced chasm. They've introduced cliffs, and now they have this generic water.
Correct. Well, that was there before.
Which is, it's basically a lake of some sort, some kind of thing, or a marsh. Chasms are a challenge because it's basically a crevasse or a hole in the table, which is
the way they describe it. Yes.
Yeah, that is a modeling challenge for terrain to make it look nice.
You cannot.
And it's not something you see sold, readily available. So it's the one thing that you're going to see people just like cutting out pieces of felt or whatever to represent. So aesthetically, to me, it's not a nice. It's a negative, in my opinion. I would have very much rather they just called it a lake. Okay, so skinks can still swim across it. What's no different than flyers. So this is a terrain feature that you can find. So it's basically a deep water thing. It's impassable water. I think that'd be better. Building, I'm just going to work my way backwards. Building, fine with building. I kind of miss, and I understand, especially now that they've changed the building rules, which we'll get to, I see they have to do it this way. They have to have individual buildings.
Right.
Instead of having, back in the old days, you could have a cluster of buildings.
That's true. They had the role that was, I think it was a 12 or something that was village.
Yeah. So, so aesthetically, once again, you don't have that opportunity really. In theory, I guess you could randomly end up with two buildings next to each other. But, so that's too bad, but it's okay. Cliffs. Well, this is the wrong word. Because this is a totally impassable piece of terrain. This is really a rocky outcrop. It is not a cliff.
Correct.
A cliff you can climb up one side. Yeah. So, So they should call it Rocky Outcrop or something else. I'm with you on the ruins. It's just too common, I think, on this table. Walls, an old one. Walls and fences. I never liked. Once again, this is an aesthetic thing. This is a fluff thing. A random wall in the middle of on a table doesn't make any sense to me.
Just in the middle of a
it's like,
plain,
why they build this?
terrain.
Yes, why they build this wall here? Oh, because there was a road. Oh, we don't have any roads. So I'd rather walls be a random thing that went with fields and buildings. If you roll a building, you roll again, and maybe on a 5 or 6, you get a wall to go with it. I think that'd be much more interesting.
1 through 3 is number of wall sections, and a 4 through 6 is none.
Yeah, just
whatever.
How you want to do it. I just rather, just from an aesthetic perspective. Yeah. Fields are fine. Fields are fields. Hills are hills. Water. If you made chasms, lakes, and I just make water marshes, that would be the difference between I can walk through one.
Passable water as opposed to
passable water versus impassable water. I think that'd just be better.
But I mean, the main thing here, like I said, distribution. I would like to see this cleaned up a bit.
Yes.
Or rearranged a bit. Personal preference. I mean, it could be that people are loving this.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you.
Everything we say is personal preference. So
it's all we have. It's personal preference.
Yeah. To me, it's just more. I'm a fan that they've added more terrain features and they've added a little more interest. I thought it got a little dull before, so this I think is a big plus. I'm okay with the effects of most of the terrain, just not necessarily in the order and in the nomenclature that they've chosen.
Correct. I do not like cliffs. I don't
cliffs,
mind the effect of cliffs, the way they're described.
It's an impassable piece of terrain.
It's an impassable, obscuring piece of terrain.
And I don't like chasms because it's too hard to model it without something clear.
All right.
And it's going to end up, for me, it's going to be a lake anyway.
Correct.
Because it's the only thing I have that's going to look nice on the table.
So moving on to deployment types. We kept the frontline clash, same as it was.
Yeah.
But we've added the Dawn Assault, which, actually looking at this, I kind of like.
Yeah, I like this one. But it's interesting. It's different. It's way different, actually, as far as a deployment type, because you can't deploy on 1/4 of your frontage.
Correct. And
your opponent has the same problem, but on the opposite side. So this really, I think, enters in some interesting possibilities for deployment.
It does. It's an interesting addition to the deployment.
It's not as it's going to kind of stink against castling armies, but pulling the corner, and then they're that much. Your opponent's that much farther away
from you. Correct. If they can't deploy directly away from your corner. If they have a corner.
Have scouts, So
Counter thrust is pretty much what it was. Just a few minor differences.
They just
with the spacing changes.
They tweaked the spacing, but it doesn't matter that much.
Correct. And circle stayed the same.
Circle pretty much the same. Refuse flank pretty much the same. They've introduced this marching column, which conceptually sounds rather interesting, and the distances are the same. It's just you deploy starting from basically your right and working your way left. Not a fan of this in a I don't play tournaments, so that doesn't matter. But in a tournament environment, just because it slows down potential setup. But
it will slow down potential setups because you're thinking about it. Well, I don't want to. I need to put this unit here, and you've got to pretty much. You kind of have to think out your whole deployment before you start deploying.
Correct.
So I think in that case,
well, you do, and then you'll see your opponent, and that may cause you to change. And
correct.
Yeah, and then the distances that you choose.
Right. I actually I like this. I like this as a thought, the way it goes. But again, I think in tournaments it's going to slow it down. The one thing I'm not a fan of is in that war machines ignore the deployment rule.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of that. But other than that, it looks good. It's another additional deployment type, which is fine.
Right, and I'm fine with that.
Variety is great.
More variety is great.
Which brings us to the secondary objectives. Hold your ground, breakthrough, or what they were. They've added this new one called Spoils of War, where the goal is to gather precious loot. You throw out 3 markers along the dividing, and then you're trying to pick these up and carry them, and whoever has them the most at the end of the game gets the secondary objective. Interestingly enough, they made it so fast cav and light units are going to typically be smaller.
Yes.
And not have the 3 full ranks.
Mm-hmm.
So the march rate goes down on those units. So you can't just makes it more difficult to go grab one and then run and hide.
Yeah, it's a little harder on MSU armies. However, it looks like most of the army books now, the core units, any type of infantry, is minimum 15 models. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but they've made core units larger. So you don't
Right.
until you've taken a casualty, you're still get your full movement.
Yeah. So you take your casualty. No, you have to. You're slower if you have 3 full ranks.
Oh, that was you had to have 3 ranks to have it.
No, if
At
you
least?
have, if you're carrying it and you have at least 3 full ranks, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, if you don't have 3 full ranks, your march rate is set to its.
Yeah, if you don't have, unless a unit that is carrying the marker
Right.
has
Okay,
at least 3
you're
full
right.
ranks.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're 1 casualty away.
One casualty road from being slowed down.
From
If you're
being slowed
15,
down.
if
Right.
you're the minimum size.
Right.
Correct. King of the Hill. This one is defend and desecrate the holy ground.
Yeah.
Another nice addition. I just played a game of this the other day. It's an interesting. It's an interesting secondary objective. You pick a piece of terrain that's not entirely within your deployment zone, and that's the one you're going after. The opponent does the same, and whoever holds it at the end gets the bonus.
Yeah, I like these because it basically means you have to get 2. I think it's of the ones that they have, it's the easiest to get a non-win on.
A draw.
A draw on, yes. Right. But it doesn't do anything weird. I mean, spoils can cause some weird activities to happen on the field. So.
Okay. Capture the flags. It's pretty much what it used to be. The only difference they've changed, the only thing they've changed in this, you select 3 scoring units from each side. If your opponent does not have 3 scoring units, you used to automatically get 1. For every one below 3 he had, you automatically claimed 1.
Right.
Now the difference is you don't get them automatically. You just pick which unit becomes scoring for the purpose of this rule.
Right.
So it's a little bit different. I kind of like the other one the way better because I thought it kind of penalized units that were built without scoring units.
Yeah, it did.
But anyway.
But there's a few armies in the game that are not exactly replete with scoring units, so.
Yes, correct. Helps them a bit.
Yeah.
Secure target. This is what it was before. Nothing's really changed here except for the way they describe it.
Right.
So anyway, that's it for the secondary objectives.
Okay, which brings us to decimated checks.
Decimated checks, which we don't really need to get to the page for. Basically, on decimated checks, if you have a unit that's at or below 25% of its starting wounds, it has to make a leadership check
Every
or
turn.
it becomes shaken.
Right.
And shaken we'll get to
Yes.
later, but it's a bad thing.
So, and you happen to be decimated right there.
And
But this is a very important change. So if your units are weakened before, they just did their own thing.
Right.
This makes it very hard for those people that had fast cav and they were down to the last guy to use them as chaff and blockers, etc. And it can be a little tough on crappy horde guys that they're designed to take a lot of losses, but they get to this point, and all of a sudden they become combat
They're
ineffective
not so
potentially.
good, yes.
Yeah.
Well, my thing, my big, I guess the biggest place where this is hitting me is my little wolf or spider rider units. It used to be that I'd get hit and take 3 or 4 casualties. I've got 1 left, and the comment was always the laughing comment: as long as I pass my discipline check after I've got hit and pass, 1's just as good as 5.
Right.
For what they're being used
And
for.
sometimes better.
And sometimes better because it can maneuver much better.
Yeah. Because they also tend to be outside of the leadership bubble. So,
correct. Yeah. But now, especially now, that unit of a single wolf rider or spider rider is testing every turn on a 6 to be effective, or it's just sitting there for a turn.
Yep.
So this hurts things like that.
Exactly. Or your block, maybe you had some goblins and they were fighting, they lost to combat, they ran away. You managed to get them to rally somehow, and now they're pretty much stuck back there because the likelihood of them
Correct.
influence to battle.
Yeah.
Conceptually, I think this is a neat idea. I'm not sure I like it, considering how few units armies tend to have in the game.
Correct. And that brings us to the magic phase, and this is just going to be...
This is totally different.
This is totally different, so just... there it is. The magic phase, basically the big thing, this is entirely different, but having played a couple games of this now, I'm coming around to being a very big fan of the magic phase now.
I mean, first you generate cards, dice differently.
Correct.
Instead of rolling, you have these cards, or however you do these cards is up to you. But then you generate both on your turn magic dice and veil tokens. There's different ways to get additional veil tokens. Channeling gives it. There are magic items that give it. There's some spells that give it. You convert veil tokens 3-to-1 for magic dice, so you can boost the amount of casting that you're doing in a turn. So that's very different. Casting's basically the same. You throw magic dice at a spell. You try to beat the roll of the value of the spell with your die roll. The spelling works the same way. The difference is it's much harder to spell now because there aren't a lot of there's no dispel scroll.
Correct.
There's there's no standard pluses for dispel. I've seen one or two in armies. But, so the guy that's dispelling, he's probably going to let 1 to 3 spells through depending on who he's blowing against each turn. So you need to think that through when you're trying to dispel spells. So that changes the game to a certain degree. Mm-hmm. The other huge change, which we can't applaud enough, is the
choosing spells.
You choose your spells.
Correct.
If you're an apprentice, you get the number 1 spell. If you're an adept, you choose 2 spells out of your first 4. If you're the master, you get 4 spells out of all 6.
Right.
Plus your
hereditary
spells you can choose from. So it makes it so you can build your mages to support your army. If you bought your mages to be magic missile guys, they're going to have magic missiles because you can pick them. If you bought them to be a hex guy, you can pick the hex spells. Yep. You can double up on spells, so you have the ability to get one through. Mm-hmm. So they've made the magic phase. Building your mages is now, you have to put a lot of thought in, and this is my opinion. You really have to put some thought into it, and how does he really work with your army? It's no more, God, I have to take 4. I hope I get this 1 spell or I'm screwed. That's gone now. Now, if you needed that spell, you're going to get it. The challenge is if that's only 1 spell, it's going to get dispelled. Now you're going to have to think about a backup spell for it. So.
Right. No, I think the choosing spells is a change I can't talk about and I can't applaud enough because it is so fancy. It's a change that's been needed all along and is fantastic. The only, I'm not a huge fan of the exception to choosing your own spells. Like you can't take the 1 and the 4, you can't take the 1 and the 6. But I'll work around it. It's much better than what it was.
They have some magic items to let you get around it.
And the flux cards, in general, from playing in the game, in general, you're 2 dice up minimum. The active player has 2 dice more than the defensive player.
Yeah.
In general, I mean, there's a couple of these like cards 1 and 2 where you're only going to be 1 card you might only be 1 die up.
Right.
But in most phases, you're going to be 2 to 3 dice up.
But most armies, if it's important for you to have magic, you have ways to get other veil tokens to ensure that you have 2 dice. So so you have that.
So
I personally I find that flex cards a little more complicated than I'd like, but I don't have a problem with them.
They also added the fizzle rule, where if you
don't
roll the die you roll to cast or to spell isn't high enough, any 1s go back into the pool. Another balancing factor where you roll 4 dice, where you roll 4 dice to cast a spell, you roll 2 1s and 2 2s. That was the end of your magic phase before. Now at least those 2 dice go back down. And based on what I was saying before, if it's your first one, now you're probably equal in dice still, even though you burn 2 dice.
And I mean, definitely also if you want to take magic now, I think, and you need to take multiple spells because one's always going to get stopped.
Correct. The other, of course, along with the magic change, another change was the miscast table, which is now the only miscast. The miscast is not on a double 6. The miscast is on any triples. And those go as you see here. If you use 3 dice, you're a -1 to the miscast attempt. I mean, the level of the miscast. You still can roll 3 6s, and on, triple 5s get a pretty bad result, even though you used only 3 dice, but it's unlikely.
Miscasting, I mean, is definitely much less likely than it was before, which I think is a good thing.
Well, especially if you're a 3 dice player.
And I mean, it still hurts toughness 3 expensive guys more than other guys.
Yeah, it's the one.
If you get the 2s or the 3s.
It's the one thing they kind of missed.
Yeah, they still haven't quite dealt with that instead of dealing with hits going to wounds, but okay, whatever. But it's a much better table.
Correct. And they could, like you said, they could resolve that by having the hits and
cut
the hits in half and make them wounds.
Exactly. And then here it's kind of neat because they're fixed results. It's not this how many dice did I roll and all this other kind of stuff. They have to compete. So the actual table, this is a simplification as far as I'm concerned.
It is. Although the dice you rolled do still apply to the 2 and 3.
Yeah.
It's for the strength. I mean, for the strength of the hit. But anyway, it's overall, the magic phase to me did get more complex, but I think it's worth the complexity is what they got out of it.
The magic phase is definitely more complex. Yeah. Not, crippling complex.
Correct.
There's some subtlety things.
But I do think it's a better magic phase than what it was before.
Brings us to bound spells, which are different again. So now the bound spells have 2 power levels. They give an example here of, this must be is this the 2.0 rules or is this the...
These are 2.0 rules.
Okay.
They're just giving an example.
Yeah, it says I haven't seen a 5/9 since... I've only seen 4/8, so that's why I was wondering. So now you have 2 power levels. The first power level, basically you put down 2 dice. There's no rolling for bound spells. That's the main thing you got to remember. No rolling. There's only rolling to dispel. First level, you put down 2 dice. Second level, you put down 3 dice. Your opponent has to roll, equal to or better than to dispel the item.
Correct.
So at the low level, and almost everything I've seen, I'm sure there's some we haven't, probably in the dwarf book, because I haven't looked that closely at all those. So that's 4 tends to be the low level. You can take a chance because the caster has to put down 2 dice. That's it, but it counts as a 4, even though they put down the 2 dice. There's no more, spamming 1 die bound items, which is an improvement.
Which was a hole, to me, was a hole in the game.
It was a hole in the game, so they gotten rid of that. And now you can dispel. You might take a chance to say, hey, I've got on a 4-up, I got a 50-50. It's not that important for me to get rid of it, but if I do, great, he's burned off 2 dice.
Right.
So you have that thought process. Now when you go to 3 dice, when you go to the second number, which is usually an 8, you're putting down 3 dice. Now your opponent's got to think, okay, I got an 8. I have a decent chance if I roll 3 dice of getting rid of it.
Correct.
But if I really want a reasonable amount of surety, I really got to roll 4 dice.
If you really want to be sure it shuts down.
And
it's still not sure.
Then you got to roll 5 dice. So, but still, chances are, you still have if you try to just roll it off, you have a good probability of not dispelling the spell if you equal their die. So there's a thought that goes into it. So, but at least it makes them put down 3 dice.
Correct.
On the flip side, they can no longer just roll 5 dice and get like crazy numbers on bound items.
Correct.
So, they know that if you want to stop it, you can stop it.
Yep. All right.
So, I actually kind of like how bound items work. I kind of wish the other spells worked that way, frankly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there was a way to cast every spell at a minimum and a maximum power level, just drop dice and did it.
And then it's dice management. Since they're making you manage tokens and dice, and I think then it becomes a management issue, and it's really the variability would come with the speller, what they're trying to pull off.
It's going to bring us to the shooting phase. Now, a couple changes into the shooting phase.
Yes.
One of them, let's start
with the main one.
Of what I have.
Yeah.
Is the aim score.
Yes, this is big. It doesn't change anything mathematically.
Mathematically, it's exactly what it was before, but to look at it from a beginner, I have an aim score, and from that I hit on a 3, like it shows an example with a longbow. I hit on a 3, and I apply my modifiers, which modifiers are negatives.
Yes.
Anyway, but
basically it's telling you what your 2-hit number is.
Correct.
So you're either adding or deducting from your 2-hit number depending on what's going on.
Yep.
The very simple mechanic, very straightforward.
Rather than the
the calculation.
You need a 7 to hit minus your ballistic skill. Then you add in the changes.
Exactly. So
it's just much cleaner.
It's just so clean. This is, I said, it doesn't change anything from the mechanics, but it's just a simpler way to show it, and it's a simpler way to calculate it.
Correct. That's the big change that I'm a big fan of.
Yes.
I like that as
well.
well.
And it's not a change per se, but it is a change.
It is. And they took away 2 modifiers, the shooting at skirmishers and multiple shots. The multiple shot one is built into your profile.
Right, and skirmishers is basically hard target, which is a special.
A lot of skirmishers, if not all, have hard target.
Yeah.
To make them -1 to be hit.
Right. Which is hard targets above, so
Correct.
Yeah.
The other change they put into this section is the what they call the hopeless shot.
Yeah, this one I'm not so thrilled with.
I'm not a fan of
this. Is a nightmare as far as
I'm
concerned.
It used to be if you needed a 7, then you had to roll a 6 followed by a 4 up.
Right.
Now now you roll to hit, and then you re-roll to hit with whatever modifiers put you above 6.
Right. So you apply all the modifiers till 6.
Yes.
Then any extra ones you apply to the next roll.
You re-roll it to hit again, applying the next one, and if you hit the second time, then you hit.
Right.
So anyway, it's very complex. I'm not a fan of this.
I do not. Yeah, they went the wrong way on this one.
They did make it so that if you roll, and it also, one thing it did add to some armies though, is if you roll a 6 on the initial roll, if the second roll hits, it does still stay poison.
Yeah.
Earlier versions where if you needed a 7 to hit, you could not poison.
Right.
Now you can still poison.
It helps poisons. It helps people with high ballistic skill because the second modifier, they have a higher probability of getting the 7. And guys with bad ballistic skill, to aim numbers. I shouldn't be using ballistic skill anymore.
Yeah.
Bad aim numbers, they have a low probability of getting hits when it's hopeless shots. So, yeah, I'm just not a fan. I think they've made this far too complicated.
A 6 is just a 7. If you need a 7, you just miss and be done with it.
I didn't mind. You see it done in different game systems. You see rules that say if you can't hit, you miss. You see rules that say 6 is always hit, which I wouldn't be opposed to considering how ballistic skill shooting works in this game.
Yes.
Especially now that they've taken away multi-ranks with volley fire and all that. You see it that you roll a second die roll. I think Flames of War has like a 5 is a 7. So there's all sorts of things you can do.
Right. Yeah, it's just
and poison could still work. You could basically say if your first roll is a 6, you still get your poison results. So
the extra calculations
it's just not necessary.
You're
not getting enough for what's making you go through. Which modifiers did I apply to the 6? Oh, that's going to be a conversation.
In addition to that, the other two changes to shooting, which are not really covered here, but we're going to throw them in just because we're in shooting, and that is volley fire. As you just mentioned, you no longer fire in more than 2 ranks.
Right. So it works generally the same as far as somebody has to see. That's the key.
If one guy can see,
which is going to be a little harder now, but. If one guy can see, then you get the volley fire rule, which means that you can fire over intervening guys without a minus. But the bad thing is, I'm not sure the bad thing. The big difference is you can't fight in multi.
Can't
ranks.
Fire in more than 2 ranks.
Right. So you're not going to see these big blocks of cheap infantry with cheap bows just raining tons of arrows down on you.
Yep. Yeah, I don't know who would have done that.
I'm sure you don't.
The other change that kind of gets thrown into this is the throwing weapon range was reduced.
I'm just trying to back up. There are a couple of armies that have a rule that they get, extra rank shooting. So as a special army role, so that gives them that advantage.
Okay.
Yeah, Empire and I think Elves. I think they both can do it.
Okay. And then, like I was about to say, the throwing weapon range was dropped from 12 down to 8.
Yeah. So that's going to affect a lot of people. A lot of times you always took throwing weapons pretty much because they fired far enough. You could stay at still a good range. And now that they've dropped them down to 8, you got to get a little closer. So I think you'll think a little harder.
Okay. In
Wheeling.
we're in movement, right? Why are we in attacks? Should have been before these two.
Yes.
Anyway, let's go back up to wheeling real
Yes.
quick. We put that one out of order.
We're in the order.
There we go.
You're out of order.
The big thing now in wheeling is in pivots and wheels.
Yeah.
And the major change here is when a unit wheels, you rotate the unit forward around either one of its front corners. The distance moved by the unit is equal to the distance the outer edge of the outermost unit in the front rank is moved from starting to ending position.
Right. Straight line.
Not the actual distance. And where is the one we were talking about? Where does it say? Oh, an advanced move.
Yes.
And then the big change, though, up here is units consisting. When performing an advanced move, no model can end its movement with its center further away than its advance rate from its starting position.
Right. Because it used to be your additional models could move up to twice, or under the old rules, which was basically the march
Your
route.
march move.
So now so if you have a 4-inch move, that means no model in that unit can move more than 4 inches. So
Right.
it could mean if you have a big bus of guys,
Yes.
your front guy can easily move 4 inches to turn 90 degrees, but that ends up being like 7 inches for your back guy.
Correct.
So if we scroll down a little bit,
The best one is the yellow one, I guess.
yeah. So you see how this guy's moved forward, and now he's wheeled forward. Well, that back guy has gone 12.5 inches. We'll assume that these guys have a 5-inch move. So,
Right.
or we'll say they're dwarves in this case, 3-inch move. So he's moved over 3 inches, which you could do, and then he tried to wheel, or 5-inch because that's where the outside wheels. Then we got a 5-inch. Now that back guy's moved 12.5 inches. So
Correct.
that's not, as the big red X says,
And
not a legal maneuver.
but this was also the case before when you're marching. The
Yes.
change now is this applies when you are just advancing.
When you're advancing, yes.
So if that unit in its starting position you see down there, facing straight up, if it doesn't move the 3 infants, it just takes a 4-inch wheel to the right, just wheels around to the right, 4 inches. It cannot make that in a normal advance move.
Right. It'll end up being like 8.5 inches.
Because the guys in the back cannot move that far.
Correct.
It's going to limit severely what you can do with an advanced move.
With advanced move. Which most of the time, it's not a big deal. It matters more if you've got archers
Right.
and your ability to turn them around. Or if you've done a swift reform and you're trying to do something funky. So, it could affect you. But this is a big deal as far as people had enough challenges with me. The other thing, of course, is it's a straight line now for figuring the wheel, which makes it easier for people.
Yep.
But you need to keep an eye. So I think we've said it in our other videos. To start with, you're probably better off putting a marker at the back of your unit
Correct.
to get you into the habit of, measuring. Because when you screw it up, you're going to need to put it back.
And you're never putting it back in the right place.
Exactly.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Moving on back down to where we were. The next thing we have is charging units. I'm going to leave it on this one of these pages. Anyway, a charging unit now gets a +1 agility
Yes.
in a fight, which is
all initiative.
a nice change.
Yeah.
It gives a little bonus to the guy that charges. Because before it was +1 combat res, which was probably not going to swing the combat one way or another. This gives the charger an advantage.
Potentially it means they can go first.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Or even if not go first, maybe even go the same time.
Yeah.
which
Yeah,
which
say
in
that.
a lot of cases is a
But
big
going
deal.
first can be a big deal if you have high strength attacks, a lot of them particularly.
Correct.
You may vaporize your opponent before they can do much back to you.
Yeah.
So it can be a big deal.
It can be. And that's a significant change.
Yeah, and the counter to it is the spears. So, but that's a significant change.
The other change as far as combat goes is war machines. Now, where you don't see it specified out anywhere else, but this
Yes.
one picture here on the bottom right
Yes,
means a whole lot in this.
it does.
And it was kind of snuck in on us.
Yeah,
War machines are no longer you clip them on any position
And fight
you
six
send
guys.
6 guys go in and fight.
Doesn't exist.
You line up, you square off on them like it's showing here in picture B.
And trying to you still have to try to maximize the number of guys
to their imaginary footprint.
Yes.
Which is not really their footprint because their footprint is round.
Correct.
But anyway, if their footprint extended out.
Their flank extension lines.
Correct.
Yes. They may have to think about going back to square bases.
Yeah, unfortunately. They're not going to hope they don't want everybody to rebase their stuff again.
From what I can tell, most people haven't rebased other round ones.
A lot of people didn't
rebase.
Yeah. But anyway, this is a significant change as well because you do have to hit them in the center. You do have to center up and maximize on them. You can no longer do what you could before, where it was clip the guy on the end to line up the overrun where you
go
wanted
3 inches
it.
away into a 90-degree wheel, so you could go careening off to the side.
So, I mean, if you saw some of our tactics videos before, which was a major portion of a few of those,
yes,
those are no longer valid.
Exactly.
So, you have to maximize. War machines are no longer hit automatically. You do still have to hit them. You do go back to having to hit them again.
And because you line up against them, that means if you get like in a multi-unit melee, you can still be attacking the war machine.
Correct. Yes. I mean, they took away that thing where you couldn't attack the war machine if you were fighting somebody else.
You know, if you had like if your 6 guys was engaged and you were kind of messed up. But yeah, so now, it makes it different.
It's different.
The big thing is you have to swing at them.
You have to swing at them, and I do like the change of the limited overrun because I thought war machines gave
they gave
a
all
big
kinds
advantage to your opponent in
choices, bonuses. Yes,
they didn't take them all away. I mean, you can still hit this in different ways. You just have to center up on it.
Yes,
as opposed to careening off.
It just takes away the extreme movement.
Correct. And then the other change to the combat phase was this.
The new hit chart. So before, pretty much, if you were better, you hit on a 3. If you were like 4 worse, you hit on a 5. Now they've added 2 more categories. If you're 4 better, you hit on a 2. If you're 8 less, you hit on a 6. So they made this more complicated. The reality is it's only going to apply rarely to combat blocks. I mean, if you have a really elite guy and the other guy's, happens to be really bad, like zombies or something, or you've managed to get them down with through magic or something, it shouldn't come over. But where I think it's going to happen a lot is with characters.
The zombies to elites can still get the 1 to 5, 1 to 6 range, but
and there are number 2s out there. So I mean, 2s versus 6s against elites is you can still see that.
But for the most part, you're right. It's not hitting a lot of blocks.
It's where you have
characters.
Yeah, it's where you have something like whatever the big
Scourge of Wrath.
Swings up against some cheap guys. They just can't hurt them. Bad enough they can't wound them. Now they can't even hit them.
The one thing to remember on this chart is failing a fear test no longer puts you at weapon skill 1.
Right.
It just makes you +1 to be hit.
Right.
Which we'll cover a little bit more later. But anyway, that's just something that does not come into this chart.
Correct. Which often will mean you're a 5 instead of a 6. On this chart.
Right.
So it often means it's about the same as it was.
Correct.
In certain circumstances, it won't be. But not a fan of the new 2 categories myself. But
I don't think the
I don't think the big stuff needed to help.
I don't. Yeah, I agree. That's my big problem. Is I don't think that big.
Yeah.
What you were hoping when that big Scourge of Wrath came into your crappy troops, you were just hoping that
you could get a wound here or there.
It could roll a few 1s and 2s and miss you a few times. Maybe it'll fluff some attacks. And your combat res can take it. Now it's kind of helping them as we're not rolling 1s and 2s.
Yeah, it's like my block is as many points as you are, and you're this flying thing, and I can't beat you. Yeah,
correct.
I can just hope you don't kill me. Now you can even kill me faster because you're hitting me on 2s.
Because you're hitting me on 2s.
Forget about the stomps and all of that. So, yeah, that's a disappointment.
Next thing when we get down to it is the where we go, pursuits and overruns. The change here that you need to note is fleeing from a combat.
Yes.
Fleeing from a combat is now directly away, not center to center. It's directly away.
Yes.
Which in the Ninth Age in the old GW terms, directly away meant center to center.
Yes.
It was redefined as center to
Yeah,
center.
all because of a fact
Yes.
question.
And now in the ninth age, directly away means directly away.
Yes.
You go straight back.
So you're not going to see any more of this. People thinking about which casualty they take from the rear rank
Right.
in a melee, just in case they run or they're going to pursue.
To shift the center of the unit.
To shift the center of the unit,
line,
figure
yeah.
out the rank. So that all goes away. So that
Correct.
this is a simplification. It also is a heck of a lot more logical.
It's a simplification, it's logical, and it clears up some disputes in a game. Because, again, center to center, well, if you're
Yes.
going off at 35 degrees, are you going to hit that unit or are you not going to hit that unit?
Exactly.
It makes that much
It's
clearer
much cleaner.
because it's straight lines
Now,
as opposed to
multi-unit combats, that's a different thing also.
It is. In multi-unit combats, the difference is, I don't know if I have a picture here or not, but
Picture, you just pick, right?
you pick.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's no longer the largest unit. So bringing up that little eagle into the flank or whatever, and
Gives you the option of making him flee from that
right.
instead of the other.
you can really you lose a lot of flexibility to do the weird angle stuff as far as, so you don't charge them at weird angles. I want two on this side and one on this side. The stuff that the gaming stuff you used to be able to do, but you still have another thing that you can do, which is bring a second unit into it now, which could potentially set you up for doing something that you want to do.
Correct. Yep.
Or set him up so if he does get away, he's still got a flank problem or whatever, or runs off the board, or whatever
Right.
it is.
Moving on from that, we get to the special rules. Special rules, these are not in proper order, of course. Let's start with let's start with supernal, which is the supernatural.
Yes.
Just was too long of a word, I guess.
Yeah.
Supernal has a minor change to it.
Besides the annoying name.
This is the old demonic instability rule.
Right.
It used to be that you took your combat break test, and for whatever you failed by is how many wounds you took. How many you failed your break test by.
Right.
So you lost the combat by 5, but when you roll your break test, you rolled a 3 or whatever, and you only take 1 wound because you only missed your break test by 1.
Right.
You missed your leadership check by 1. Now, if you fail your break check when you're testing, you drop down. You fail your lead. Anyway, you drop down to become unstable, and you take 1 for every one you lost the combat by.
Right.
It's no longer for everyone. The dice roll no longer matters. The dice roll's only there to see if you
pass or not. And if you fail, you lose it. You crumble.
Right. And this has some effects on the extremes.
Yes.
Your big Scourge of Wrath, which we keep bringing up, used to be able to fail its dice roll, its leadership check by 1, or it used to be down 1 by the combat, roll a 12, and now it's taking 3 wounds.
Right.
Whereas now it's down by 1, you fail your check, you roll the 12, you fail your check, but you're only taking 1 wound because you only lost the combat by 1.
Right.
So, I mean, there's extremes on both ends now.
Yeah.
So, it's different. It's kind of a significant difference, but it helps and hurts. So, it's kind of a trade-off.
Depends how much you lose by.
Correct.
It all depends on
If
how
you're
much you
losing
lose
by
by.
a lot, it hurts you. If you're losing by little, it helps you.
So you lose by little, you got a bad roll, no big deal. You lose by a lot, and you have a reasonable roll, you might lose. A lot of guys might stink.
Yeah.
It's just different.
Definitely different.
My only gripes are I don't like the name, and I kind of wish that the whole crumble and thing was the same across all the different. Still don't see why we have to have 2 different ways of doing it.
2 different ways. Yes,
Yeah.
correct. It should be just
Have one way. If you have this ability, this is what it is. Just pick one.
Moving on, we have skirmish.
Skirmish. We have panic tests according to the screen.
Yeah. Well,
Skirmish. The big difference was skirmish is basically the same as far as you line up as you did before. You have to have your 1/2-inch gaps. As with the old edition, you don't get together, whatever, you just move. You move around well. But the big thing there is you don't block line of sight. It's one big thing. You just provide a cover bonus to whatever's seeing through you. And then the other really big thing to me is you get to fire in multiple ranks.
Correct. And you have a 360 line of sight and fire in multiple
yes.
ranks.
So multiple ranks is interesting because, as we said before, you no longer have volley fire. So you could theoretically do the same thing of volley fire with skirmishes if you can have that big of a skirmish
Correct.
unit. But it does mean you can move them around in like groups of 9 or whatever and fire all of them.
Yeah, go 3 by 3 by 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And at 360, you see 360 degrees, so that helps you as far as where stuff is around you and how you're reacting. And then also how you charge is makes it rather interesting.
Correct.
And I'm trying to remember how it was
You can
written.
still wheel only up to 90 degrees.
Right.
But you can immediately, they don't have, your line of sight is 360, so
Right.
what would mean normally people are outside of your front arc.
Front 45 now.
Now you're at a 90 degree.
They just have to be in a 90 so they can just swing around and hit you.
Correct.
So now most skirmishers aren't very good at fighting.
Correct.
The-
And that's kind of the idea.
yeah, which I'm sure there's a few exceptions, but yours might be better than theirs. But it does make them much more maneuverable on the charge and much shootier. So tactically, they're a little more effective at doing what they're supposed to do, which is move around and engage things. But most of the fighty guys, as far as I haven't seen it yet, they're no longer skirmish. It's really for really light screening troops now.
They have light troops rule or whatever.
Yeah, they may be light troops, which means they're still formed up. But
right. Brings us to the next one, which is stand behind. The model can be placed anywhere. The model with stand behind can be placed anywhere on a unit. It does not have to be placed as far forward as possible, even if it has front rank. Among models with front rank, models without stand behind have priority over stand behind models. What this has done, the significance of this rule is, it used to be if you were 5 wide and you had 2 characters, or 5 wide, you say you have 3 characters and a full command in the unit. You could choose one of your characters to stand behind and go to the back rank.
right,
Well, standards and musicians have this stand behind rule, so now they get bumped to the back before your characters do.
right.
So it's kind of forcing a lot of characters to the front of
right.
units.
There are exceptions. Some characters have stand behind rule, but yes,
They do.
so it kind of makes you push your characters forward.
Especially, a army that I see affected by this more than others would be ogres, because ogres, a lot of ogres run 3 wide.
Yep.
And that's your full command. So you are allowed to freely place your characters in the second rank.
Right.
So this is kind of forcing those guys forward if they don't have that stand behind rule, and I don't think they do.
It affects
the most part.
Equitane for the same reason.
Correct. Well, Equitane typically weren't you weren't moving your characters to the back.
No, I'm saying, but it affects that.
But it does affect them as
that
well.
tactical
Correct.
difference.
I agree.
Those are the 2 armies I think it affects the most.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's necessarily good or bad. It's just that it affects them the most.
Understood. Next one is we have magic resistance. Magic resistance is
Way different.
Way different in that if your unit will be affected by the spell.
Any spell, so any hex or any
Aura.
missile or
Yeah, correct.
any damage.
Hexes as well now,
Yeah.
as opposed to just damage spells. They get whatever your magic resistance is, they get that minus to their casting roll.
right.
This hurts as far as
I guess it actually applies to buffs.
no. A spell that's targeting at least one enemy unit with
okay.
model.
There we go. Okay.
For a minute there, I was like, wait a minute. It doesn't, No.
It does say enemy unit.
It does say enemy.
I didn't remember that.
So,
I'm old. What you can do?
yes. But this also, again, if somebody's casting an aura hex on your unit, a few of your units, you take the highest magic resistance in the unit, you apply that to his modifiers, to his die roll. So I think it's a positive change for magic resistance. It makes magic resistance a little more useful than it used to be.
It makes it definitely potentially better. Definitely MR2 is a good thing to have.
Correct.
because now it's a +2 harder to spell. That's basically a die you're taking away. MR1,
Right.
not so much. But MR2 is definitely.
He's going to have to use another die to cast.
He's
going to
have to use another die to cast that item.
Correct, and the fact that it applies to hexes as well as damaging spells is a buff.
So they've definitely buffed as far as what it covers, and
Correct.
because Magic Resistance hasn't been very good for a very long time. So I think this fixes it to a large degree. It's just which level it is going to make a big difference.
Okay. That's going to bring us to Frenzy. Frenzy. Frenzy no longer gives you an attack. There you go. We're done.
Yes.
If you take a panic test, decimated test, or fear test, you gain +2 discipline to any of those tests. Panic, decimated, or fear. That's nice. If you take a break test, the test is normal. If you take any other discipline test, you're at -2 to your discipline.
Yep.
And at the start of... So Frenzy still has the chance to force you to charge. The distance has been shortened. It's your advance rate +7. So now it's like an average charge distance.
But the probability is substantially
The
increased.
probability of you having to do that now, because you're taking a discipline check at -2, because this is not a panic, decimated, or fear test.
That could be like a 28% increase in probability.
So it can be a fairly large increase in probability.
Plus, it doesn't sound much, but on a bell curve, it's a big deal.
It's a 1 in 4? Yeah, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
So the other thing to keep in mind with this -2 discipline check, if you notice the other one, that any other discipline check, that's a rally test.
Yes.
You're -2 to rally this unit. That's pretty awful. Especially if you're below a quarter, at or below a quarter at the time.
No,
It gets even worse.
It's helpful. It's -2 to your die roll.
It's -2 to your discipline. You're taking a rally test at -2 to your discipline. So your leadership 7 frenzy unit now is rallying on a 5 if it's out of the bubble.
Oh, yeah.
Even if it's in the bubble, it's -2.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the one above, and I'm confusing myself.
Yeah. The discipline is what's being modified, not the die roll.
Yes.
So it's kind of a hidden thing in there is if you start fleeing with a frenzied unit, it's tough to get them back if they're a lower leadership and outside the bubble. Even inside a leadership 10 bubble, you're still rallying
probably
on
a 7. If you're a 10, there's not that many 10s.
I'm just saying in a bubble.
Yeah.
If you're in the leader's bubble, even if the
I'm
leader's
saying that
9, you drop
most
down to a
leaders are
7.
9s. It's a 7. So
Yeah.
you're passing a little over 50% of the time. So
Significant.
It is significant. I mean, and the attacks aren't here anymore, but they have other ways of doing that. So you have to look at your individual units. You don't necessarily haven't gotten weaker in that regard, but you're definitely much harder to use as far as you're very likely to go charging off when you don't want to.
Yes, you are. So that's going to be the big change there. Like I said, definitely.
Yeah, you're going to see a lot less frenzy in the game.
But most things that have frenzy also have this rule, which is battle focus.
Yes.
And this is for every natural to hit roll of a 6, you cause 2 hits instead of 1. This is to try to make up for the loss of the attack.
Well, it depends on the unit. There's a lot of units that do not have battle focus. They've just given them a fixed extra attack.
Correct.
Also, which is actually better.
That.
Yeah, because if you lose, there's no losing the frenzy now. So,
There's no losing the frenzy. Correct. There's no losing this either. The battle focus either. This has a couple weird effects to me. The battle focus rule. We did the math on a unit of, I think, frenzied feral orcs or whatever, and it came up right at the same thing.
Right.
Without changing anything.
Well, it all depends.
If they need a 4 to hit,
It all depends if you need a 4 to hit or not.
Right. The one thing that I find odd about the battle focus rule is if your unit needs a 2 to hit, it hits on 2s.
Yes.
The battle focus doesn't do a lot for you.
Correct.
If your unit needs a 6 to hit,
yes.
It's still not a lot. It's still giving you the same extra hits, but disproportionately.
Yes.
Every hit you hit does 2.
Correct.
So it's just a weird something I didn't like with, and still not a huge fan of with the what they call the parry rule, whereas lower units, the worse you are, the better.
Yeah, proportionally.
The better benefit.
It doesn't hurt you, but yeah. So,
Correct.
yeah, I'm not a fan of this particular battle focus rule as a replacement for re-rolling. But it's one half dozen of the other.
Re-rolling or giving an additional attack.
Yeah.
Right. Special equipment and this is not where we're supposed to be. In armor. Armor was our next topic. We skipped down to get to some of these.
Yes.
Armor now is let's see if I can.
So armor is the same, but they've come up with potentially the most convoluted thing you can think of too. Whereas
you said it, not me.
Yes. How do I say this? The archery with a hit number is a fantastic change. I'll say
Correct.
it again. The armor went the other way. It works the exact same way as it did before. It's just how you do the calculation in your head is different. You probably won't pay a lot of attention to it unless you're a new player, and then you'll have to explain it to new players. And
Right.
that makes it, a little more of a challenge for them. So instead, basically, you fail your armor save on a 7.
You
make your armor save on a 7. I'm sorry, you make your armor save a 7, and all levels of armor is a die roll modifier to get you to 7.
Correct.
Now you're rolling 1d6, so it doesn't. So everybody basically starts off with an armor of 7, and then they have light armor, they go to 6, heavy armor, they go to whatever. And as before, you add these different levels of armor, they stack on top of one another.
Correct. So again, like you said, the end result is exactly what it used to be. How you get there is a little different.
Yes.
And I'm not a newbie, so I can't tell you whether this is easier to easier to calculate for somebody who's never played this game before. Or
I think the calculation is exactly the same. It's more understanding the concept.
Explaining this to somebody who's played the game before
Yeah.
is a little odd, especially. And then to make matters a little bit worse, the way they did this is the way they wrote, especially the armor enchantments down here. Like this one is your suits of armor. Your wearer gains +5 armor to a maximum of 5.
So to anyone who doesn't understand, it sounds like you have a 5 armor,
Correct.
which you don't.
But
You have a
don't.
2 armor.
Correct.
Yeah.
You have a 2 up because you're maximum of 5. So, but then they did this where your armor is set to 3,
Right.
which means you have a 4
4
up
up
armor.
Right.
So the different ways of writing this, and then when you look at the units and the unit cards, they say they have a 4+ armor.
They actually tell you the armor value.
Correct. So again, it's just kind of
Yeah.
cumbersome.
So the top one would have been fine if it explained this is how you get to your armor value, because the stat line on the units all have their armor value, and it only really matters when you're talking about building your characters. And they could have just set the armor value of the character and then listed the items and said how much of a plus that it gives.
Right.
So,
Correct.
and that would have been much cleaner, I think. And hopefully we'll do that in the future.
Yeah, I think they will take a second look at this and clean it up, because
Yeah.
I've seen a couple questions and things on the message boards about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll generate a little bit of redoing on that.
Yes.
Back to terrain again. Kind of bouncing around a little bit now, but
Terrain again in the context of, now we're going to talk about the terrain before we talk about how you generate terrain and the types of
Yes.
terrain. Now we're going to have some things you have to be aware of as far as the changes to the terrain rules.
buildings are a huge change. You can go
Yes.
now re-enter buildings and garrison.
Mm-hmm.
Garrison buildings again. They contribute to hardcover. You can enter a building if you're no larger than 125 by 125
Right.
millimeters.
So basically 5x5 on 25 millimeter basis.
Correct.
Now remember, buildings are either 6x8 or 6x10. So if you use small buildings, you're going to have to come up with a base for them to represent them
What do you mean?
because of the footprint. all terrain has a footprint.
Oh, correct.
Yes.
That's a good point.
So
Well, terrain has always had a footprint.
understand
Yeah.
that for buildings it was always kind of different, right? So now it's much more important because of how the deployment works and everything.
Yes, I guess so.
Yeah.
So now you'll have to. We're not going to go into all these rules into here,
No.
but just you can now go in. You can enter a building. You're stubborn in a building. You fight.
You can shoot out of a
You
building.
can shoot out of the building. When you fighting a building, you attack the building itself, not the opponent's unit.
Right.
And
Both
buildings
ways.
are defensive weapon skill 10.
Yes.
It's a very odd way of doing it. It's kind of. I still haven't had a building fight yet in the few games I have played in second edition, so I can't
Right.
give you a definitive answer in this. But from first glance, it doesn't add enough to it to make this worthwhile.
When you've got a page and a half of rules to talk about one
Correct.
thing,
Right.
it's
And
a bit much.
The big concern, of course, is you put a solid unit in the building and hide it in the building until near the end of the game, and then you pop out onto an objective, and
Of course, now I can charge my cavalry into a building.
you can fight. Your cav can fight units that are in buildings.
Yes.
Correct. You can't occupy it.
Correct.
But anyway, so that's the buildings. Next, we have the chasms, which we've talked about before.
Right. It's just impassable terrain, but you can see through it, so it doesn't do anything except for stop movement. Except for fires.
I would
Flyers,
much rather have them just kept this name for this piece of terrain. Impassable terrain. Done.
Yep. And if you don't want to do that, make it a lake.
And cliffs, again, get rid of this cliffs R and just call this impassable terrain, which is opaque. You can't see through it. So there's two pieces of terrain.
Or call it a rocky outcrop.
Rocky outcrop, whatever you want to call it. It's impassable terrain that you cannot see through.
Yeah.
Chasms are impassable terrain that you can see through.
Yep.
I don't know the cliff and the chasms, the names don't really fit what they are, or
Right.
chasms in their instance don't really fit on the battlefield
Yes.
because you can't chisel out a hole in your battlefield.
Right. Unless you're making your own personal boards.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they're the same every
And then
game,
it's always the same. Yes.
or on YouTube, whatever. That's cliffs and chasms.
Fields are interesting because cavalry is no longer negatively affected by them, and they no longer cause things to start on fire.
Yes, exactly.
I'm a little saddened by that, but
I'm actually a fan of both those changes.
yeah. Well, the cavalry, I mean, I personally feel cavalry has a problem in the game design. I accept the weakness of cavalry as it doesn't do well in terrain.
Terrain, correct.
And that could be one of its counters. It doesn't do well in terrain. They've kind of taken that weakness away. Now it just doesn't fight well as it didn't before.
Right.
But now it can do it in terrain. Yeah.
Forests have basically not changed.
Yeah, the same.
And that brings us to
Hills are different.
Hills are opaque terrain, so you cannot see for
Through
units
them.
behind them.
And opaque doesn't mean translucent. Means you cannot see through
You cannot see through them.
Yeah.
Hills contribute to soft cover if you're behind but partially on them. So if you put less than 50% of your unit on the hill and the rest hanging off the back, you get soft cover,
Right.
which is not changed. Hard cover for being behind the hill and entirely off them, where they can only see less than half your base. You get hard cover. Again, has not changed. All these are great.
Yes.
Nothing big. No big deal here. The change is the elevated position change. Well, the first change.
Yes.
If you're more than half your base on a hill, and all model shooting parts of a unit that is on the hill, ignore intervening models not on a hill.
Right. So you're no longer gigantic, which was kind of goofy in the old version.
Correct, because even though you were gigantic on a hill, but a gigantic model still caused a problem.
Right.
Shooting. Now that's no longer
Now
the
you
case.
see over everything.
Now you just count as you ignore models that aren't on a hill.
Right.
So if you have multiple units on a hill, one does still block the other.
Right.
And in some cases completely.
Correct.
Where it did not before.
Right. You could actually see through them before, which was
Correct.
annoying too.
Another change, they lost the bonus to combat res if you charge down a hill. Instead, now if you start start the hill on the hill with more than half your footprint, when you charge, you get to re-roll your charge range
Yes.
rolls.
That's a neat rule.
Correct.
It sounds intuitive. It's not actually It's not actually correct, but it's a neat rule. I like it.
It is a nice rule. Big fan. I'm okay with what they did with hills.
Yeah,
I think the hills are a good.
I think this is it's improvement. There's no question.
All right. What else?
Then we have ruins. If you're an Infernal Dwarf player, you're very happy because all your guys get ruin striders.
A few of them do, yes.
Yeah, so it's covering terrain, but it's dangerous terrain 2 for cavalry and constructs without skirmisher, and dangerous terrain 1 for everything else that doesn't have skirmisher.
Right. Which is where it was.
Yeah, so that's interesting. And then, it gives hard cover to everything except for towering presence. So it's a nice terrain feature.
Pretty much stayed where it was. The difference is if you're randomizing terrain like we showed before, it shows up a lot more often.
It's much more common, more likely to be on your battlefield.
Right.
So you better have one in your boxes. You're probably going to get one.
Yeah, you need to put one together.
Walls they're the same, aren't they?
No, walls have some differences. Walls are only dangerous terrain to constructs.
Oh, that's right. Cavalry can't die in them.
That's the big change for walls.
Woohoo! I don't know how many cavalry guys I've got plastered on the sides of walls.
You've bloodied up quite a
I've
few
lost entire
walls.
units to walls.
Right. So that's the big change to walls.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
The dangerous terrain checks are only for constructs.
Right.
You still, if you're in contact with the wall with your front facing, you're still game distracting. Covering terrain for models behind them.
Right.
While defending the wall.
And distracting if you're defending.
Correct.
From charging enemies.
Covering terrain for models behind them when defending. Okay,
Yeah.
Covering terrain. Where does it say that applies to shooting? Hard cover. There we go.
Yeah,
never mind.
cover.
Okay, never mind. That's where I was missing. And then water. Water is dangerous terrain 1 for standard size models on foot. No penalty for cav. Units with more than half their footprint in water can never be steadfast.
Yeah.
All melee attack. Here's a new little flavorful change. All melee attacks against or by models in units with more than half their footprint inside a water feature lose flaming attacks. They had it. It's a neat little flavor thing that wasn't there before.
I'd prefer that flaming attacks that it was against the ability.
It was what?
What if somebody cast a spell at you like a fireball,
right?
And you were in water.
Oh, okay.
That you got,
Okay. In addition to melee
yeah,
attacks?
you didn't count as flammable, for example, if you
okay.
were in water. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's the terrain changes to
right.
The next rule we have is shaken. Shaken is I actually kind of like what they've done with shaken. It's kind of difficult to let's see if I can find it real quick. Where's the description? Of course, I'm going through the end. Decimated.
I think it's close to the end.
Oops. There we go. In the psychology chest. So shaken, if you're shaken, you cannot declare charges, you cannot pursue, you cannot overrun, advance, march, reform. You can't do a random movement, you can't do shooting attacks. What this is here, and in addition, its close combat attacks suffer -1 to hit, and close combat against it gets +1 to hit. So what this is a catch-all for things that were in the game before. Because it used to be when they wrote, if you fail a charge, you cannot do this,
these things,
blah, blah,
right.
blah, 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 blah. Now they say you're shaken.
If you rally, you cannot do this.
Correct.
Yeah.
And now they it's made it streamlined by saying...
You have one rule that covers all these situations.
Exactly.
But they've added the ability with this, was it not devastated? What's the rule again?
Decimated.
Decimated, which applies to that also.
Correct. So the other thing that did come into play here is fear. So far, when I've had a couple people look at this and say, "Oh, it's terrible to be shaken because you're -1 to hit in combat and you're +1 to be hit." I'm like, well, wait a minute. The only way that I've found to get into combat and be shaken is when you fail a fear test. So failing a fear test no longer brings you to weapon skill 1. It just makes you +1 to be hit, -1 to hit, which in a lot of cases is exactly what it was before.
Well, you have the spell, right?
What?
There's the one spell that you either flee or you
Yeah, but
become
that
shaken.
can be cast into combat.
It's not a hex?
No, it is not.
Okay.
So I think it's considered a damage spell.
Oh, okay.
It might be a hex with damage.
All right.
It cannot be cast into combat.
Okay.
I did check that. So, like I said, the effect of it is it's nothing new. The only new part about it is the way it handles fear. Instead of bringing you to weapon skill 1, it gives you plus and -1 to be hit. The rest, like I said before, it's a catch-all. It's streamlining it because they don't have to repeat that all through the rule book. You can't do this and you can't
exactly.
do that.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a streamline.
So, this was a nice change to me. Right? That brings us to the last thing we're talking about. Oops, I was right there.
You were.
The last thing we're talking about was victory conditions.
So we talked about the secondary object. This is kind of goofy because it's in two different sections of the rules, so it can be a little confusing. So,
yeah, I've never been a fan of the way they split that.
Yeah. But this is basically defines when you pick your secondary objectives at the beginning of the game. How you too far.
Okay, go ahead.
When you pick your secondary objectives at the beginning of the game, this is basically how you determine if you actually get the points for them.
Correct. The secondary objective scoring part of it.
Yes.
The rest of this is the same. I mean, the dead fleeing units are what they were before.
Right.
Now they're just using the term decimated for
right.
units that are below 20, at or below 25%.
Right. Before it was just at or below 25%. Yes.
Starting over health points, correct. And then the secondary objective changes. So the first one I'll start off with was the hold your ground. This one used to hold the ground. Used to be whoever ended the game with the most scoring units within 6 inches of the center of the board won the secondary objective.
Right. So this rewarded MSU builds.
Because you could wait until the very end and then all dash into the center of the board and grab up the objective. So the change to this, of course, is now you're generating a counter at the end of every game turn. You figure out who has the most scoring units within 6. That player gets a counter. Right. At the end of the game, the player with the most of those counters wins.
So if you have a Death Star, you want to go park it on this thing.
The downside, of course, is the Death Star that goes parks on this thing and no one can come near it. And it sits there the whole game.
Right, or at least for 4 turns.
Correct. Well, you can get to it on the first turn.
Yeah.
Even if you move 8, you can march 8. You're within 6 of it.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Yeah,
you 6 turns in the game. You need to be there for more than half to get it.
Correct.
If nobody gets it on turn 1, then you only need 3 turns. But whatever it is.
Correct. That's a good point. So a change the way that's handled. The breakthrough change, another one, the player with the most scoring units up to a maximum of 3 within its opponent's deployment zone at the end of the game wins the secondary objective.
So this also kind of nerfs MSU builds that had lots of scoring units.
Correct, because it's a maximum of 3.
Right.
So if you get 3 units into your opponent's deployment zone,
you're capped.
The big thing is you don't have to worry about losing the objective.
Right, exactly.
Nothing else.
You've capped it. You don't have to worry about losing it. Spoils of war. At the end of the game, the player with the most units carrying markers wins the secondary objective. So this is the one you have the markers and you have to go capture them, and as long as you have 3 ranks, you get to move at full speed. Otherwise, you move at your advance rate.
Yep.
This
is
one's
a brand new one.
This is very brand new. This is the one I'm the least intrigued about.
You are intrigued?
I'm least intrigued just because it's a ranks and flanks game and the limitations of maneuverability and things of that nature and cause odd things to happen.
Okay.
In a skirmish game, I think it's a neat thing. But yeah,
The next one is the King of the Hill. If there are no scoring units this is the one where you've selected a piece of terrain outside of your deployment zone, your opponent has done the same. The wording on this is kind of odd.
yes,
But if there are no enemy scoring units within one and only one player's chosen terrain feature at the end of the game, then this player wins the secondary objective.
right.
So
So basically, there's two of them out here, yours and theirs, and to get it, you have to hold both of them.
no, you have to hold your own and
Yes.
no one be in the other one.
That's true. Yes.
Correct.
Yeah, that would work too. I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah, it's a kind of a
Yeah.
weird thing. But anyway. And the opponent being in the anyway. It's the wording
It's
is
the wording.
a little cumbersome, but it's what it is.
I think we both like the rule. We just
Yes.
the wording's just a little strange.
Okay. And capture
Capture the
flag.
flags is basically the same. Just
Yep.
the front part's different how you determine it, but
Yeah.
otherwise, who has the most wins and secure target is the same.
Secure target was the same as
Yeah.
well. The other thing, and this is mainly a model classification,
Way different.
way different, and I really
I shouldn't
like
say it's way different. In the end, it does mostly the same thing. It's just how they get there is way different.
Correct.
And this is a true streamlining.
It is, and I'm a fan of this.
Yes.
Because now you have 3 sizes and 4 troop types.
And 4 types.
So you can be a standard infantry, standard B, standard cav, standard construct. You can be a large of those. You can be gigantic of those. And then you just take the rules up here and the rules down there,
Right.
and that's what you have.
And it's a combination. Instead of having that full page we had before
Correct.
with each type, trying to figure it all out.
Yes.
So this is really interesting. Also for targeting characters, you have to be mindful now because now it's size and type. So picking out characters and units.
Oh, correct.
Yeah. And some people have missed that. They focused on the size and missed the type part. But yeah, so this makes, I think, so much cleaner.
It is.
And there's some few tweaks. I mean, how many dangerous terrain tests large units take, I think is different, isn't it? Was it 2?
It used to be 4.
Yes.
And now it's 3. I mean, sorry, not large. Sorry, gigantic.
Gigantic's what I meant to say, yeah.
Gigantic, correct.
Yeah.
They added five supporting attacks from a gigantic model.
Yes.
I've yet to see where you can
Waiting
have
for
a
the-
second rank of a gigantic
two,
model.
two ranks of giants.
Maybe if 2 giants can join
Yeah.
each other.
And they have this tall rule now, which basically, if you're mounted, means even though you're just the same class, so if you're standard cavalry, you're still standard like infantry is, but you're tall, that means you can see over all other standard. And they can see you also.
Right.
So
The
same
best way-
same with monstrous cav. You basically count one, for spotting purposes, one category larger than you are.
Almost, not quite.
Yeah.
You count 1.5. Basically, if you're 1, it basically adds a half height to
Yeah.
you. Because it doesn't put you in the next category.
No.
But it puts you, you can see over models the same.
Right.
So even though you're a tall standard, you cannot be seen through large.
That's true. That's
I mean,
true.
it's kind of weird. But
Yeah.
the best thing, like I said, the best way I saw it explained was tall adds a half to your unit.
Yeah.
So however it works best for you to come up with it. I do like the way they've done all this.
Yes.
That is the unit size types.
Right.
Next thing we have is melee weapons, which we've covered it before, but
And I guess we'll
Not
cover
sh-
them again. I was
not
just
sure where
scrolling
they
through.
are. The big thing
They're now
here,
in with all the other special rules.
They are.
The special rule sections are huge.
And while we're on special rules, mentioning it while I'm searching for this, the one thing I will say that I'm not a fan of is the way they split special rules.
Rather how they've organized it in the different
'cause
categories.
They're over in different places. You've got a set of special rules, then you go to another one, and now you've got
Yeah.
a set of personal special rules.
Which, if you're using a computer, it's not so bad because you can click. But if you've got a piece of paper and you're searching through, it's a pain in the tuchus.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we start off with paired weapons. The big thing with paired weapons is they still give +1 attack like they did before, but they no longer give +1 initiative, which was kind of game breaking for a lot of
Monstrous
units.
infantry,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
come to mind.
Monstrous infantry is the one that was probably the worst offenders. So they don't do that anymore. Now what they do is they basically counter parry. So if somebody's got a hand weapon and shield, and you've got 2 hand weapons, now they basically don't get that special rule anymore.
Cancels their parry rule.
So great rock paper scissors type of rule. Really like that a lot.
And it does give you +1 offensive skill, which is also a bonus,
Yes.
which I've seen make a difference.
And then the last thing is +1 offensive skill. Now I've noticed a number of units on the stat line, they've dropped the offensive skill 1 to compensate for the paired weapons. I've seen that in a few cases.
Have you seen that?
Yes, I have.
Not. But
But so you have to keep it. So don't just use your old stat and think it's okay. It may be different. It may be the same for you, but in other cases it's not, especially on characters, of course. So it's definitely something to pay attention to when you're talking about characters, because you go from quite often from a 5 to a 6 or a 6 to a 7, and as we said on that hit table, that can make a big difference.
Yes,
especially if you went from a 7 to an 8. So yeah.
And that brings us to hand weapon and shield, which is the parry rule.
Yeah.
The only change to this is that, of course, paired weapons cancel it now.
Right.
And if you are already better than the opponent, you get +1 to your defensive skill.
In place of, you still get the old rule. You can only be hit on 4s. That's still there, unless the person has parry. But if you got better guys, you get +1 to offense, which might mean that you
defense.
Get hit. Defense. I meant to say, which may possibly mean you get hit on 5s if you're better enough than your opponent.
May give them a -1 to hit. Correct.
Yeah.
So something to maybe look at. After looking at it, it's very rare that that's going to come up, but
it's rare.
The chance is there.
But you need to be mindful of it.
Be mindful of it and do it there.
Especially with your more elite guys.
Correct.
And characters.
So then you have your spears.
Spears are very different. They still seem to be the weapon of choice for non-characters. Even more so now, I think. So attacks made with spears fight an extra rank, which they did before, and they get armor 1 penetration. That's what they did before. However, they lose the lethal strike ability that they had before. Now, close combat attacks with model parts wielding a spear gain +2 agility, which is old initiative, and additional AP1 the first round of combat, provided that their unit is not charging, and it's not engaged in the flank or rear by an enemy unit. So basically, if you get charged, you're getting a +2 agility and a +2 AP.
If you're charged in the front only.
If you're charged in the front armor, thank you. If you're charged in the front. So it makes these very potent defensively, but they still have the same offensive capability, which is the fight an extra rank and the always +1 armor penetration.
Correct.
So they're very nice for a lot of units, because if you're like a human, all of a sudden you're agility 5, which means you're hitting at the same time as standard elves, not elite elves, but standard elves. If you're a orc and goblin, or you're a Saurian ancient, all of a sudden you're 4s. So you're hitting relatively well. Now you have to be mindful that all chargers get +1 also.
Correct.
So
you're basically
getting a +1
over your opponent.
Over your opponent.
Yeah. So that's the spears.
Yes.
Lances and light lances have the same change done to them. They're no longer +2 strength, +2 armor piercing on the charge. Now they gain a devastating charge with a factor behind them.
Right.
The light lance gets +2 strength, +2 AP, and the light lance gains +1 strength, +1 AP.
Right.
Again, it's not a change. It's the way it's written.
It's just the way it's written. It's ability.
Right. Because devastating charge, you'll see throughout. There's different ways.
Right. It's now a combination of the old devastating, thunderous, and other abilities. So
Correct.
It's just anytime you get something special on the charge, it's now covered under devastating charge. And lances get +2, and light lances +1.
Correct. The only other thing I had on my list that's a fairly major difference is
well, all of the special equipment is different.
Correct.
Which is the old magic items. We're not going to go through all of them.
Yes, we have.
We have before, so you can go look at that video if so interested. The difference here, though, is the the number and instances of banners that you can have in armies that you couldn't have before.
Correct.
First, if you look at your army book, you'll see there's no more veteran standard bearers. Most of your corps, if your corps had banners before, I haven't seen one yet. I'm sure one exists, but generally speaking, they can have a magic banner.
Correct.
And it's probably 50 or 75 points depending on the army. Maybe it's a 25-point one. I don't know. I haven't looked. But so you can have more banners. Banners still get +1 per instance in combat res, so that ability is still there. The additional thing is many banners have multiple options as far as you can take them more than once in an army. So in these examples, these are all standard. You can have up to 3 flaming standards in your army. You can have up to 3 relentless companies, up to 3 legion standards. So you can basically say, hey, I want a flavor for my army. I'm going to give all my guys this particular banner so I can, fight, have an extra rank ability, or so I can cause flame or whatever. Or I can build specialty units with the banners. Now, if you look at the army books, there's a lot of single-use banners in the army books, but there's some multiple-use armies. Depends on the army book. But definitely you have the ability to take a lot more magic banners.
Yes, definitely. I'm not a huge fan of that. I like the ability. I like the change where more units can have magical banners. I don't like the 0. I don't like the up to 3 of the same type of banner. I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah,
just my personal.
I like
opinion.
that there's a lot more banners in the army. I'm disappointed in that they've given a lot of. One of the things in the old days for the game that shall not be named was elite armies had more access to more magic banners.
Correct.
And crappy armies had less of them.
Right.
Now, even the crappy armies have lots of banners. I mean, they went too far with the veteran because then you hardly had any banners except on your special units.
Right.
So they've reversed that. But I would like to see, certain crappy units maybe not have access to a magic banner, or they be a lot cheaper banners they have access to. That's my first comment. I don't mind the multiple instances of banners as long as the banner ability itself is not too powerful for the army.
Right.
So that's really kind of the deal. It concerns me a little with the banners in that, and we talked about this, we both did not want to see, we wanted to see all magic items out of the basic rules and assigned at the army level. So certain armies wouldn't have access to certain items, and certain armies would pay, more for certain items.
More or less for certain items.
Right. Because basically, if you've got a unit that's really fighty and doesn't really need money buffs, but it's kind of slow, warriors of dark gods come to mind.
Mm-hmm.
3 instances of a relentless company can be kind of horrifying for your opponent. It's like it's just all of a sudden, I want to get rid of his big ribblies before his guys get to me. Now I've got his entire army is right in front of me.
Well, you can only use one of them a turn, so that does limit it somewhat. But
turn 2, you're there.
I
so
understand. I'm just saying though. I'm with you in that I do not like the multiple same banner.
I don't mind certain. This banner I don't like is multiple. The banner of Relentless Company, not at that speed. If it's +1 speed, I wouldn't care. I don't mind the Flaming Standard as a multiple banner. I don't think it's game breaking. I don't even mind the Legion Standard because it helps. Right now, they still have a problem with cheapy Horde infantry. Needs all the help it can get.
Correct.
So it depends on what the banner does.
True.
Yeah. A little bit of movement, a little bit of combat ability. I think that's okay. It makes you tailor your army to a specific design. It's just what is it?
All right.
But don't be surprised because before when somebody says this guy's got it, wait a minute, I thought you said this guy's got it. He does. They both have it.
This guy and this guy.
They both can have it. So yeah. And then the tricky one also is the BSB can have 2 of these.
Correct.
So you can create some interesting combinations.
Yes.
Or stack them, or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, this Legion standard you see there on the bottom, maximum rank band increases by 1.
Right.
Normally this means the unit can add up to 4 ranks its combat score, or up to 5 full ranks if 2 are in the same unit. What it does not say...
This could be +3.
If it can be +3 or not.
Or
if they're using that example as a cap.
It's an example.
It's in parentheses. I mean, it looks like a example to me. So it looks to me like you can have 3 of these, because 2 on your BSB and 1 on your
Yeah,
unit.
that's what it seems like, which would be all of them.
Which would, plus 3 combat rank. You got 4 rank. You got 3 ranks already. You got 3 other bonus from this. You got plus 6 combat reses.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that means you have 2 banners in this unit. That means you're up to 8.
Yeah.
That's pretty scary.
Which, if it's a unit of goblins,
Who cares?
who cares? But if you do this to a block of orcs with a whole bunch of
actually-
characters in it, I'm not so happy.
Even goblins with parry, it's not that easy to kill 8 of them.
Well, it's like, you have a challenge getting rid of them, but
No, I'm saying they might win some combats.
they could win just because of combat res.
Because the
but
combat res, they're plus 8.
against crappy stuff coming at them. But I'd be worried about it with, let's say, really tough guys.
Right. Well, tough guys aren't going to have that many, I would think.
Depends how you build your army.
Agreed.
If I want my Death Star, this is one of the ways. If I can't give it stubborn in some way,
Give
or
it a plus 5.
even if I
combat
do
res.
have I'll give it a plus 5 combat res.
Yeah, let it get hit in the flank.
Yeah.
No.
The-
But anyway, all right. That's kind of a redo of the video we did early, but
It is.
this one just kind of concentrated.
But
on the
there
changes.
we just kind of went through it. But these are the ones that, at least in our mind, you need to be more mindful of.
stand out. You need to be mindful of them. Pay
Right.
attention to them.
There's a lot of other little minor changes. Most of it's nomenclature. This is not the case here.
All right, that's going to do it.
Till next time.
Thanks for listening.